Hi there, and welcome to the Plugged In Show. I'm Paul Asay. If you could peer into the future, what would you see? Flying cars? Star Trek-like holodecks? Nice, helpful robots? Well, that's hardly what most of us will find in our entertainment. Read a futuristic book or watch a science fiction show these days, and it's less Trek and more wreck. Yes, dystopian stories rule the entertainment roost these days. And why is that important? We will tell you. And while we're on the topic, let's turn our attention to the next prequel in Suzanne Collins' best-selling Hunger Games series. It's called Sunrise on the Reaping, and it sold more than 1.5 million copies in its very first week, which beat my record by quite a bit. So
1.5 million, maybe?
Yeah, just about.
Or 0.4999999.
I think that's right about there. Yeah. So some of you may have a copy of this book in your very own home. We'll discuss that today as well. And to help us unpack both of these conversations will be Emily Chow and, of course, Bob Hoose. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
So we are going to be talking about dystopian shows, which can be a little bit tense to actually walk through. So I thought we would actually start this with slightly different icebreaker and go the opposite direction so that our listeners and our viewers don't get
So we won't be talking about our favorite death scene or something?
No death scene here. We are going to be talking about slow TV because in Sweden, one of the most successful slow TV shows has just concluded its season. Do you know what slow TV is?
No, I was about to ask, what is slow TV?
So slow TV is sort of a Scandinavian phenomenon, right? They have these shows. They go on for hours and hours and hours watching people chop wood. Or the first one was just sort of this minute by minute recount of
just life. Basically.
It's just life. So the latest one was a 24/7 stream for 20 days.
What?
Of a moose migration.
Oh.
A moose migration. And people have been...
Okay, I kind of love this idea.
So people have been cooking food, like making meals in advance so they wouldn't have to miss a moment of it. And there was one person quoted in this article that I was just reading, I feel relaxed, but at the same time I'm like, oh, there's a moose. Oh, what if there's a moose? I can't go to the bathroom. So you have this really compelling, it's slow TV, but for some people, they really eat it up.
It feels like it would be very, I don't know, just peaceful because you're not watching drama or something. Like you were talking about, just watching somebody chop some wood. Like, that could be, kind of peaceful to have in the background.
Why? I mean, I don't, it doesn't.
It's not appealing to you. You're
me.
just like, why would I even have...
Why would I sit and watch a bunch of meese?
I
don't think that's the plural.
No, that is not the plural. There's actually there's a really good reason I learned this week for why it's not called meese, but we do call them geese.
What is it?
It has to do with the root of the word. I can't remember exactly. Somebody who is good with linguistics should email us and tell us exactly why. But I read it. But basically it has to do with the root of the word. And moose, I believe, is a Native American word.
Yeah.
I don't know which tribe or nation.
It's like my last name. My last name is Hoose, but they don't call us Heeses.
Heeses. That would be so fantastic at a family reunion.
We're the Heese.
If I ever meet your family, I'm going to call you Heese. I'm going to be like, it's Heese.
That's right. All of you.
That's awesome. So okay, clearly slow TV does not appeal to you, but do you have a show that you just watch that gives you sort of that nice, peaceful feeling? Or do you watch TV for that reason?
No.
See, I think Emily and I do.
Okay, this actually plays into today's conversation so well. So yes, I do have a show that I watch. I really love the Great British Baking Show.
Oh yeah, it's so nice, right?
It is. Well, first of all, I love baking, so watching it's just like, ooh, I feel like I'm learning stuff. And honestly, it goes in one ear, out the other. Like maybe someday I'll get really into it and be like, oh, I know the science of baking now. But today is not that day. No, but I like watching it. And I like seeing all the things that they come up with. And, you sit there and you start salivating because you're like, I want to eat that. But I don't know. It is a charming, delightful show. There's no language. And it's just nice.
It's just nice.
And they're
Everybody
so
gets
polite
along.
to each other. Like, they're competing, but they all become friends, you know? So it's very different from, like, American competition shows. Like, because, like, I have seen other American cooking shows where they're, like, competing to, like the Gordon Ramsay stuff.
Right.
Where they're all competing against each other. And they are not nice. They are cutthroat.
But it is baking. And so how can you be nasty when you're sprinkling sugar?
Well, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah,
right?
Americans can find a way.
No, I
I'm
bet.
convinced. I'm scared to watch the Great American Baking Show. I'm
Well,
like, I feel like
would-
it won't be as nice.
It would be so much different, right? Because I do think that it all comes back to Survivor, which feels like a dystopian story in and of itself. Because you do have like these game shows, they can be so cutthroat. But yeah, the Great British Baking Show, that is just like a warm blanket. You just wrap yourself in it.
The closest I ever came was Robot Wars. But then that was a lot of smashing things. And so, we got these robots that are just tearing each other apart. It's not peaceful.
No. But it was really interesting.
Yeah,
I always thought that was super fascinating. There was another show, I can't even remember what it was called, but it was like these inventors, they were running through this junkyard and they had to build things that they found.
I
What
remember
was that?
I can't recall the title, but yes, you're right. Where they had a specific goal given to them, and they had to go find pieces to build whatever it was.
Yeah, they had to build like a working microwave or a catapult or something like that. And they just had to do it all while finding all this scrap material, which feels a lot like something I would have loved to have done when I was 8 years old. So I totally agree with you about the Great British Baking Show, though. For me, it would probably be House Hunters. We do like us some House Hunters. We just sort of sit, we watch these people go through houses. It's all completely made up, I am sure, but it's kind of relaxing.
I feel like I would enjoy that more if I had a house. Not having a house, I don't think I want to watch other people go house hunting because I'll just be like.
I could see how people who don't have a house would watch to say, well, maybe I'll learn some tips.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. So speaking of houses, lots of people do own their own houses, and statistically, this is my professional segue. Statistically, life has never been better. So life expectancy has gone up, literacy rates have gone up, crime is statistically way, way down from what it was even just 20 years ago. But for some reason, we are always attracted to these visions of the future that look very grim and very bleak. We do love our dystopian books, our movies, our TV shows. Dystopian entertainment is everywhere. In April alone, last month, we saw 3 huge dystopian hits return. Black Mirror, a Netflix anthology series which examined all our technological worries. You had The Handmaid's Tale returned, which is about sort of cast forward the United States as this country ruled by religious extremists, would it be fair to say?
Yeah, we'll call it that.
And then, of course, you have The Last of Us, the HBO show, which takes us into the ever-popular zombie apocalypse.
Of course.
So, Emily, you actually reviewed The Handmaid's Tale for us.
Yes, I did.
And you have reviewed a lot of dystopian stories for
have.
us. And you have gravitated toward that particular genre in your own life a little bit. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. No, in my
Wait,
personal
so
reading.
you're destroying things and...
No, in my personal entertainment consumption.
Oh, personal entertainment. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no.
She was out killing the neighbors and standing on the rooftop with flamethrowers or something.
Crossbows.
I'm a plugged-in nightmare at home, apparently. No, I definitely I've always been drawn to that genre. I've read a lot of the books. You brought up, the Hunger Games series that definitely falls into the dystopian subset. And I like reading the books. I like watching the movies and the TV shows that have come out of that genre. But it's got its issues.
It does have its issues, and they go beyond like what we would typically count. Like clearly they have violence. They can have
Almost all of them have violence, some form of violence. Like people, you're not going to read a dystopian tale and without having at least one character die.
Right.
You know, and that's like That's very modest. I don't think I've ever read one where only one died. No, usually it's like you're dealing with some mass deaths or killings, either via natural disaster or via mass killings,
Right.
or war even. And then you have, I don't know, like I said, I don't think I've ever read a story where just one character dies. No.
Yeah.
Many characters die.
Yeah, there's a lot of really, you can just look at the screen and you can see this show has issues.
Yeah.
But the issues that you're talking about go a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah. So do you just want me to
dive in.
Yeah.
Dive
no.
in.
So like I said, always loved this genre. Personally read a lot of the books and watch a lot of the shows and stuff. So recently though, I kind of fell into the trap of dystopian dramas. And the way I see it is that people who create dystopian stories want you to be scared.
Right.
And usually they are trying to teach you a lesson of some sort. They want you to ask questions. So so like the questions that I always gravitate towards are like, what piece of Black Mirror technology do you think would actually be kind of cool?
Right.
In the Hunger Games, would you actually kill somebody to save yourself? Or would you just kind of wait it out and hope that everybody else took care of themselves or killed each other and you were just the last man standing without actually having to,
of course,
get
if you
blood
just
on
hid
your
behind
hands.
a tree, that would make a rather weak story.
Well, I mean, no. Like, that's why I'm saying, like, these are the questions that you ask each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, the authors of these stories, they want you to ask those kinds of questions. And like I said, there's also there's a learning element there. Like, hey, especially with Handmaid's Tale, if you let this happen, then these type of people will take over, that sort of thing. And
there's often a cautionary element in this.
Yeah, there's a cautionary element, and that's what they want. But what it's also doing is it's inducing fear, and a lot of people will veer away from dystopian tale or certain types of dystopian tales because if they see something that parallels their own life, no matter how small of a detail it may be, that can induce anxiety, and then they're just like, you know what? No, I don't want to think about that. That freaks me out. Well, I kind of fell into that trap. Recently. I just, I was finding things that I was reading on the news were very similar to the things that I was reading in these books. Things I was seeing happening in the world were similar to what I was seeing on TV. I was drawing parallels, and most of them, upon reflection, most of them were totally amped up in my head because of anxiety, and but because that was primarily what I was consuming, my anxiety went up and then my depression went up. And I just I fell into this depressive state because I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't even want to do my hobbies, which, normally calm me down. Like I knit a lot. I didn't even want to do that because I was just like, nope. Everything is awful and I don't know what to do with myself. And if I go in tomorrow, who knows what's going to happen, that sort of thing.
Well, I'm assuming it also caused you to look at the world around you through a certain lens.
Yes.
That you ordinarily might not look at it through.
I normally don't look at the world through that sort of lens. I don't consider myself a particularly pessimistic person, but what happened was basically it put this lens in front of me where I was having a hard time, just moving the lens back. And so everything that I looked at was just causing me more anxiety, more depression. And I was in a downward spiral, couldn't get out of it. And then finally, I paused and I realized, because once I hit the depressive state of not wanting to get out of bed, which, that's a pretty extreme state for me, I was like, okay, what's going on here? What's happening? Let's, the way I see it, that's kind of where God intervened. It was like, okay, we need to talk because something's happening here and you're not realizing it. So let's have a chat, But yeah, that's kind of when I realized, I'm falling into the trap. I am letting these things induce anxiety and create fears. Basically, it's distorting my perception of reality. And
Yeah.
I realized that. And I ultimately, I just was like, you know what? I'm going to take a step back from these types of stories for a while. I'm not going to watch them. I'm not, well,
Yeah.
other than for work. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think it was kind
Which
of
we'll
funny.
talk a little bit
I
about,
literally
actually.
realized it the week right before we picked up the latest
Handmaid's
season
Tale.
of Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, you know what? But the one good thing about this job is that there is a kind of clinical
Yeah.
aspect to it. So once I was aware of what was going on and I wasn't consuming it personally, it was okay for me to go in and take notes on it and write
Yeah.
a review of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I still haven't gone back. It's been a few weeks now, and I'm just steering clear until I'm in a better headspace.
Well,
So I have so many questions, right? Because in number one, I do want to ask: was it hard to push back from that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it was because it's hard to take something where you're like, but I really enjoy this, and I can handle it. You tell yourself you can
Right.
handle
Well,
it. You know,
we all do, right?
But I was, I mean, I was very blessed to have a very honest and open conversation about it with my husband. And he was just like, he really encouraged me. He was like, if you think that that's what's causing it, he's like, don't do it,
Yeah.
and he doesn't get super into that sort of stuff, which also helps. So I was like, let's just watch, ironically, let's watch Great British Baking Show. And he got super into that with me. So having that shared,
Don't use the lemon. No lemon.
having that shared entertainment helped, because it's not like, I had other family members there who were like, but we want to watch Handmaid's Tale, No, I didn't have to deal with anything like that. It's just me and him. So, but it was difficult because, like I said, it's one of my bigger genres of entertainment that I consume. So I did have to find alternates.
Well, and I think it's also wise for viewers to even ask themselves some of these questions before they start watching. Okay, for example, why are these companies, Hollywood, big TV, whatever, why are they making these dystopian dramas? What do they want us to? How do they want us to react? Are they thinking just purely from entertainment perspectives,
No.
or are they pushing some sort of agenda? Because with a dystopian tale like that, you can push a social agenda, you can push political agendas, you can push all kinds of environmental agendas, you can push all kinds of agendas, and making people afraid in that case is for a specific purpose.
Right. And you would think that especially within this dystopian world, more often than not, that is the case. It's more than just a story. The authors, the creators want you to think about certain things, and The Handmaid's Tale is a perfect example of that, right?
Yep.
So-
And I think I just want to I think you have to sit there and you have to consider, if you are getting anxiety from this, I do have some advice for people. You have to just sit there and break down what's happening. Handmaid's Tale is actually a really good example. So they would have you believe that, oh, nope, these religious extremists, they did a militant takeover and a political takeover, and that's how it happened, and that's all they had to do. That is not what happened. If you read the story or even watch the show, neither of which I recommend, but I'm just saying, if you break down the facts of what happens to that show, they had an environmental disaster that basically kind of brought the birth rate down to zero. People were not able to get pregnant. They were not able to have children. That's where it started. From there, the religious extremists started building up their followers, and they were like, we're going to fix the birth rate. And people were scared because they were like, well, we aren't having children. We haven't had a healthy live children in some places for 8 years, but that's how it started. Started with the birth rate, then you got the religious extremist group, then you had the militant takeover, then you had everything else that happened. So it's barring a huge environmental disaster that brings our birth rate down to zero, Handmaid's Tale is never going to become a reality.
Yeah, it's interesting. It brings to mind something parallel. Have either of you ever heard the monologue that Paul Harvey did in 1965 called "If I Were the Devil"?
No, I cannot say that I have.
Okay.
Mr. Hoose.
You can find it on YouTube, and I highly recommend it. The interesting thing about it is that he was looking at his society at the time, 1965, and he was sort of being hyperbolic about if I were the devil, I'd do this, this, and this to create this perfect dystopian world that the devil would glory in. And the interesting thing was that as he went along, he was actually talking about things like subverting the church, undermining the family, things of that nature. And and we jump ahead 60 years, and we look at our society right now, and every single element that he brought up is actually in play.
Well,
Yep.
right now
I
in
knew
our
that's
society.
where you were leading with this, because ultimately, so that was the other half of what I was going to say. So first of all, you can break down any dystopian drama and be like, okay, how did they go from where we are today to
Point
where
A
they
to point B.
Yeah,
Right,
how do you
right.
get from point A to point B? But then the other thing is what you just said. It's like, really and truly, the devil doesn't need the America to turn into Gilead. It doesn't need, the Hunger Games
Right.
to occur to achieve his purposes. Like, we're kind of already there, but that's the
It
important
just
thing.
needs
is
to
that-
erode faith and erode
Yeah.
the family and things of that nature. The basic building blocks of society can be dissolved and eroded to the point where we find our own dystopian world.
Well, and I think that that's the power of dystopian literature and dystopian shows,
Yes.
right? They know the fears that we have. Whatever fears they may be, they know what they are and they know how to play on them. And that can, you're right, there aren't definitely things that need to be addressed. But when you walk into that place in a posture of fear, which I think sometimes these dystopian dramas can encourage us to do. I mean, that's the issue, right? We know that we know the story has already been written. We know that it has a happy ending. We know that God is in control. And I think that
Yes.
that's something that as Christians, as we engage with these stories, if we decide to do that, we always need to be mindful of that.
Right.
But
if the story causes you to forget that, that's when you got to take a step back.
Right,
That's
yeah.
when you have to. And honestly, I don't think the stories I was consuming were making me forget that, but definitely, they definitely played up that fear, and it was occurring. It was like I was forgetting that
Yeah.
ultimately, who is in control? And it's like, well, ultimately, God is in control. So why am I sitting here freaking out about even things that actually are happening in the world? Like, I can sit there and panic about them, or I can remember that I can remember the truth. And the truth is that I don't have to sit here and live in fear. And that's not what God wants us to do anyways.
yeah, it is really fascinating. And I have a similar story to yours in a way, where I do think at times entertainment, I've been pretty open about dealing with depression on this show, right? There have been times where the entertainment that I have consumed has filtered into that. And I think that that's one thing that we have to remember, and that I would want to remind the listeners, the viewers who are engaging with us right now, is yes, Plugged In is there to talk about the violence, to talk about the sensual content of a movie, the language. All that stuff is super important. But I think the biggest thing that parents really should be mindful of, beyond all of that, is the content, the underlying themes of a given book, show, movie, because those are the things that can really impact us. When we are absorbed in some of these shows as much as we can be, they change how we view the world. And that's something to be really, really mindful of.
Well, and it's also when we're talking about kids and parents dealing with kids and these sort of things, I think parents need to, first of all, validate if a child comes to them with fear about some issue, whatever it may be, and then they can make sure that they're up to snuff on things in the world, so they can assure the kids, well, no, zombies aren't going to be attacking anytime soon, and but also giving them that sort of safe environment where if there are things that come up at school or their friends are talking about or some show they've seen, they can sit down and talk about it as a family.
Right.
That it's comfortable enough that, yeah, if this is bothering you, then let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. As we bring this segment in for a landing, I wanted to just go back to something that you had mentioned, because I know that there are probably a lot of, maybe some of the people who are listening now are thinking, how do these people, why do they watch these things? Why do I force Emily to review The Handmaid's Tale?
Twist her arm behind her and say, you will review this.
Let's talk just a little bit more about the process, kind of how we sort of guard against this stuff ourselves, right? And you've mentioned some of that.
I think, you go into it with a certain headspace of remembering why you're doing this in the first place. And why we're doing this is because we're trying to help people learn media discernment so that they can determine, like, yes, this is something that I can consume and it won't, affect my perception of reality or the world, or no, this isn't. And, we knew going into The Handmaid's Tale, we knew what we were getting into. We're like, okay, well, this is a show that deals with rape and murder and religious extremists, and they actually kill off legitimate Christians in that show. I think that's important to point out. Like, this is not a pseudo-Christian thing. No, it's not Christian. It is because they kill off the Christians. They kill off anybody who disagrees with their mandates, you know? But we knew all that going in. What we didn't know were those themes that it was going to instill in the audience. We didn't know it was going to sit there and make us question, what would you do if somebody tried to take your child from you, which is something that happens in the show. And it's actually why a lot of my mom friends, they won't watch the show because they're like, I don't want to deal with that. That's too much for me, And but that's the thing. If they'd known all the details, maybe they wouldn't have watched the show to begin with.
Which is why we're here, right?
So you're plugged in.
That's why we're here. So that's the first step, I think, is like, why are we doing this? We're trying to help people learn media discernment. And you go into, I think that especially in this particular case, maybe more so than some of the other movies that I reviewed, I definitely had to put some prayer into it. I needed to ask for protection, just because I already knew I was in a vulnerable state. So I did ask God. I was like, can just put a shield over me and guard me, and if it becomes too much, give me the wisdom to say something, just be like, hey, I can't do this. Can you give me something else this week, a different assignment,
And all of our reviewers always have that ability to say, you know what? I can't do this, or I can't do this right now.
A step too far.
Yeah. We always have the freedom to do that. So, and I do think that prayer is a huge component to it, but it also just helps that we're writing notes. We're analyzing this.
It makes it clinical.
Exactly. Emily mentioned that earlier. It is very clinical, because you're taking a note of everything, and so it's more difficult for you to absorb or be absorbed into the story. You're sort of standing outside and notation.
Yeah. I've always noticed, people, we make jokes how, our job is counting F words. I have always found that if I'm watching a movie not taking notes, I don't notice the language as much. If I watch it taking notes, I'm almost overwhelmed by the language in some cases. I'm like, man, why did they put that word in there? It was so unnecessary. Or, wow, I don't even know what they're saying because I'm sitting here having to write down how many F words they're saying in this sentence.
But see, not taking notes almost is worse because you're absorbing it without even thinking about it.
It definitely changes your perspective. And I've had people ask me like, oh, are you able to watch movies at all anymore? It's like, yes, I am, because I you either use discernment and you're like, I'm just not going to watch that. Or, you turn off that part of your brain that makes you count it. But I don't know, I don't think I've ever fully been able to turn off that part of my brain. I'm definitely more aware of the language and such that is in movies now than I maybe was before. I'm certainly more aware of sexual content. And if I do come across a film and there's a lot of it, I sometimes just fast forward because I'm just like, this is still going on. Like, I don't even care. This isn't even pushing the story
Time to
forward.
go get a sandwich.
Well, that's one of the things that's crazy about this job, right? Is it does sort of sensitize you to that. You notice this stuff more. And, I think we would argue that you should notice it more.
Right.
And to be perfectly honest, I've found myself avoiding those types of shows now. I've gotten to a point where funnily enough, I actually watch a lot more of the older Star Trek shows like Next Generation, because there's no language. Sexual content is like, you might see like an embrace and a smooch, but like it doesn't get too crazy on screen, you know.
That's why I love classic black and white film.
No, seriously though, because it definitely changes it. When you really think about the discernment side of things, you do start to just say, you know what, maybe not.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the best takeaway we can have. You know, it's okay to say maybe not to some of these stories.
It's okay to say no.
That is absolutely right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Well, Sybil, looks like we're safe for now.
Are you sure? This silo, I'm just not sure how we can block the door with just a pile of grain. And what if they start trying to hammer through the metal walls?
Well, it won't be a quiet place. That's for sure.
Oh, Dabney, I'm scared. What if we're the last of us?
Oh, Sybil, dry those tears and work on your English. I'm sure we'll be able to somehow conquer the walking Freds.
I never knew there were so many terrifying Freds. And so fast. Fred Flintstone nearly ran us down with his foot-powered car.
And don't remind me. And Fred Astaire, he practically tap-danced us into oblivion.
And don't forget Fred Rogers. He always seemed so nice.
Perhaps in his altered zombie-like state, he thinks he still is. But no one wants to be his neighbor now.
There's only one defense we've been able to muster against all these Freds. Along with any other entertainment and pop culture monsters that come along.
Yes. If it wasn't for our very own copy of Becoming a Screen-Savvy Family from the Plugged In team, we would have been captured by Fred Savage by now, and he's a slow one.
Yeah. What a blessing it... Oh, Dabney, it's gone!
What?
I must have dropped it on the road when Fred Mertz was chasing us. What are we gonna do?
Only one thing we can do. We simply must send a gift of any amount to Plugged In.
To Plugged In? Does it even still exist?
Of course it does. They're still out there counting Freds and F-words for the masses. The walking Freds pose no danger to that brave band of heroes. And if we send them a gift, they'll send us a copy of Becoming a Screen-Savvy Family for free.
For free? Wait, doesn't a gift of any amount mean that we're actually paying
This is
for
no time to quibble, Sybil. Go to the Plugged In Show homepage and find out how to give. Now, before Fred McMurray gets any closer.
Since the Hunger Games book was released in 2008, Suzanne Collins' series has sold more than 100 million copies worldwide.
Is that all?
Is that it? In the world of teen literature, its influence and popularity is eclipsed only by Harry Potter. But while Harry Potter went to some pretty dark places during its long run, it's nothing like the Hunger Games, where teens from across the country of Panem are thrown into essentially a massive television game show where the winner gets to retire all fat and happy and the losers all die.
Yeah, everybody else does.
So we're talking now about Sunrise on the Reaping, which is a prequel to this. It was just released just earlier this year.
Right.
It takes place before the Hunger Games trilogy. Is that right, Bob?
Correct. And it's sort of in between, because the last book that came out was 2020's Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which was sort of a prequel that gave us some history or the origin story of President Snow, for those who know the series. It's about President Snow and when he was a young man and that sort of thing. This one takes place after that book and before the trilogy starts, and we essentially learn Haymitch's story. Now, Haymitch was one of the
Mentors.
he was a mentor, but he was also one of the victors. And so anybody who read the trilogy knows who he is. And this is his story to tell us how he got to being the man that he was. And yeah, he was a mentor to Katniss and Peeta when they were in the first Hunger Games thing. So anyway, that's what this is all about. The book itself sort of gives us some character background, but it also deals a lot with, even a lot more, I think, than some of the other books, with the tyranny of government and how the uber opulent sort of become numb to life,
Right.
and that leads to tyranny. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting book.
It's ironic that I like your word choice is very unique here, opulent, because yeah, I think that what I'm thinking of is literally just all the techs in Silicon Valley and all the celebrities in Hollywood and all the politicians in DC. They are all living pretty opulent lives.
Yeah.
In my
And you can
opinion.
forget.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing about this book. I mean, you mentioned the killing.
Right.
That's the negative side. You know, the fact is that you do have this is one of the quarter quell years. This particular
Now, what is a quarter quell?
quarter quell is every 25 years. It's a special celebration, and this is the 50th year after the reason they're doing the Hunger Games. And I guess we ought to probably briefly
Yeah,
talk
let's-
about
let's
that.
unpack that
Why
just
are they even doing these Hunger Games? Well, it seemed 50 years before this book takes place, there was a war that took place in the world of Panem. And,
Which is the former
and-
United States.
exactly, it was sort of implied that that's what
Right.
it is. Anyway, in this world, there is the capital, which is that center hub of government and power,
Down in
where
Colorado
all the wealthy and all the technology, everything is located in this capital. And then there are the outside districts, which are where all the worker bees live. You know, they're all poor, they've got nothing, and they just labor to supply the capital. Anyway, so the worker bees at some point rose up against the government and said, okay, we're done with this. And the capital eventually won, but then ever since they've said, okay, we're going to show you guys, you do not rise up against power. And so we're going to have a game each year where your children all die.
Yeah.
And they send 2 kids per district into this war game. And in this particular year, because it's a quarter quell, they send 4 kids from each district.
Because it's a special quote unquote
Right. So
celebration.
everybody's going to really celebrate and
Right.
see a whole bunch of people die.
Oh my
Twice as many children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I say children, I mean I think it's
I
Trying
think
to
it's
th-
age 11 to 18.
to
I
18.
think.
Yeah, it's in that ballpark. So you could say that the older teens are closer to adults, and in some cases that gives them obviously an advantage.
They're stronger, faster, all that
yeah.
kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah. It is a fascinating world that Suzanne Collins has sort of unpacked here.
Right.
But clearly, it does seem like it's very, very dark, very
it
dystopian
can be.
world.
It can be. But on the other hand, you can't help but read this book, first of all, and see how well written it is, but also get we were talking earlier about dystopian tales and cautionary tales. This one definitely is one of those. It's a broader topic. It's not about, the environment burning up in 12 years,
Right.
or it's about the concept of mankind in a way. It really struggles with the fact that sometimes you have so much. There's that break between the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots struggle, but the haves don't struggle so much, but it corrupts them.
Yeah.
They have so much that they can become numb to things like watching children die.
Yeah.
And so all of it, and so that ties into a plugged-in theme too, because we're talking about
Absolutely.
entertainment, and suddenly in this world, entertainment is watching children kill one another
Right.
on TV and not being affected by it
Yeah.
negatively. You're just saying, "Oh, isn't that great? Look what he did."
No, they're like cheering it on, and
Yeah,
they're like placing bets, and the really rich people are sending money to like sponsor
Right.
their favorite
And little gifts in the midst of the battle.
Yeah, so that it to help them win, and it's very twisted.
So
Yeah.
so this book has that positive aspect that it isn't just showing us terror.
Right. It's a fascinating story that she unpacks. Suzanne Collins is, I've read, a Catholic, and the name Pan Am actually refers back to Roman times. Bread and circuses. Pan Am is the Roman word for bread, the Latin word for bread. So it does have this theme where it calls you back to those gladiatorial contests back in ancient Rome, right? But it does point a finger of accusation at our own entertainment-drenched culture, which we're very concerned about here.
Right. And it tells us as people, be careful. Be aware of the world around you. Be aware of like, let's face it, as people in the United States, Americans, we have a lot. We get a lot. We have a lot. We have a lot of things. And in a way, this book is saying, be careful of those things.
Yeah.
Don't let them make you numb.
Right.
To the realities of this world, to the suffering of this world.
I love that. Yeah. But to flip the coin a little bit, it does get back to how we ended our last segment. Maybe not this story. There's a lot of reasons why people might want to skip this, especially when it comes to their kids, right?
Well, I would say you really have to know your children before you say, here, take this book for your birthday.
Right.
Because
this really is for teens on up.
Yeah,
right?
it is. Oh, yeah. It is. This in many ways is an adult story, and it has some. Okay, I wouldn't say that it's as violent as some of the original trilogy. To be honest, it's not. It does. Sometimes it sort of holds it back a little bit.
That's
where
interesting.
you know what's going on, but it doesn't describe it. But it's still plenty bloody. And it's still plenty messy, and as we've already implied, the majority of the characters die.
Yeah, and that's very difficult.
Yeah.
I remember, so what you were just saying about the violence of the original trilogy, I remember I read this series when I was in college for the first time. Yeah. And I remember it's the first and only time in my life I have thrown a book across the room. It was the third book, and it was up to that point. I had seen a bit of myself in Katniss. I had seen a bit of my younger sister in Prim. And so, when people who've read the book, when this book is so old. I'm sorry, spoiler warning. But when her sister died, I remember I paused. I was like, what? And I threw the book across the room. I was so angry because I was like, my sister.
And even if you're just picking up just this book and you're not reading the full series, you're just reading this book, which you could do, you'll miss some of the references, but you're still going to be introduced to a lot of young kids that you like, that you care about, that you invest in, and then they die.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of cold and difficult, especially for a younger reader.
I think also parents need to be aware, if you do let your child read this book, be aware of what they're hearing about the book on social media. Because there are going to be people, you were talking about the themes of the book. Yeah. There are people on social media who will break down those themes, and maybe what they're telling your child is true, but they could also twist it and be putting their own interpretation and spin on it, such that they could be influencing your child to believe lies about our world. Again, coming back to how dystopian
Well, you were talking about that
reality.
lens we look through after we're immersed in this stuff.
I think you got to be very conscious of the lens that your child might be looking at the world through after reading this book, and especially after seeing people talk about it on social media.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and probably where we should land this conversation. Sure. So Sunrise on the Reaping, it has sold already a lot of books, but if it's not in your house yet, you might just push pause.
And even if parents are leaning toward their teen reading this book, you might want to read it first.
I think that's always a great idea, right? You should always be very involved with what your kids are involved with too, because
go to your library. Check it out for free. Read the book.
Because then you can have a really good conversation about it. And now it is time for perennially my favorite segment on this podcast.
But the game that you hate the most.
Which is a relative term. It's game time. It's game time, everybody. So now we are going to do Name That Movie. So the goal of this game is you think of a movie, you try to think of a fairly clever description that we might get, we might not, and then the rest of us have to guess what the movie is.
Of course, clever is relative.
Clever is very
I was
relative.
gonna say I'm winging it this week, so clever is definitely relative.
And now for an extra special spin, it is the sci-fi edition. We have to talk about dystopian or sci-fi movies. So, here we go. Mr. Hoose,
You want me to go first?
Yeah, because Emily is winging it. I want to
That's
give
right.
her a little bit
She
more
is
time.
winging it. And so, okay. A weary detective sets out after rogue automatons.
Blade Runner.
Man, you didn't even let me finish it.
I was gonna say after Weary Detective.
Yeah,
You know what I was gonna
detective,
say?
Blade Runner.
Sky Captain. Oh gosh, I can't remember the
that
title
was
of
a
it.
Good movie, Sky Captain and World of Tomorrow.
That one.
That
Or,
is a-
I don't know if that's exactly what the title is, but yes, it's got
That was
Jude Law.
fun.
as
Yeah.
Sky
And
Captain.
And it does have that same sort of theme, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
Yeah.
It's like a noir,
Yeah.
futuristic film. It's
Well, I
But
tell
it's
you,
rated PG. It's
the
super,
one thing about that film, even if you didn't like the movie all that much, it looked great. It had such a sort of visual patina about it that
Yeah.
was just great.
Yeah, we're talking about Sky Captain of World of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Blade Runner also had that.
Well,
patina,
yeah, that's true. But I was talking about Sky Captain.
Yeah, Blade Runner much less family friendly. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But- All right, Emily, what do you
Alright.
got for us?
Here we go. In this dystopian land,
Blade Runner.
four people band together and follow a set of rules to survive. A very specific set of rules.
Four people,
people.
dystopian land.
One of the rules is double tap.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, Wizard of Oz.
No.
Oh.
Okay.
Zombieland?
Yes.
Okay.
My next clue was going to be all of their names aren't really their names.
Okay. When you
It's-
said Wizard of Oz, I had to pause. I thought, what?
But it could be a dystopian world,
You were
right?
talking about
Okay.
following a very specific set of rules. They didn't
Well,
have to do that.
you had to follow the yellow brick road.
different.
You double click
the
your
only rule.
heels.
That's right.
You don't deal with talking trees. You avoid the flying monkeys. Those feel like very specific sets.
Actually, that does feel like a dystopian drama, doesn't it?
yeah.
Wow. New worldview of.
I was thinking that is
Wizard of Oz.
really
Oz
clever.
Dystopian. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
about
the book definitely is.
Oh, see,
Really? I
Have
mean,
we reviewed-
the book Wicked,
yeah.
which is
That
that
one
sort
is
of
definitely
new
dystopian.
twist on Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
That is
But
definitely
the original,
dystopian.
you're talking about the original
Yeah,
L.
yeah.
Frank Baum books
the
are kind of
original
dystopian.
isn't so much.
Well,
but-
Frank Baum, he wrote like 27 of those books, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they were like, oh man, that was the Hunger Games before. Anyway, okay, so here we go. I'm gonna slip into my best Elmer Fudd.
Okay. Elmer Fudd.
Be very, very quiet. I'm hunting people.
Jumanji.
No.
I'm hunting.
So there's a key
People.
word here. Be very, very quiet.
Oh, Quiet Place.
Wait, do they hunt people? Well, I guess the
Yeah,
The
the
creatures
monsters.
do. Creatures do, but
But
they
they're
don't.
just more. They kill anything that makes noise. They're just
But
upset
they
about
would be
the
even
noise.
creepier if they sounded like Elmer Fudd, wouldn't they? if that came up and sounded like Elmer Fudd. Ooh,
Oh,
Definitely
that's
give you
creepy.
nightmares. You'd be like, well, every cartoon I ever saw is ruined.
That would be super creepy. Can you imagine that in your darkened bedroom?
No, that's why, like, you know, in horror movies, they always have, like, a children's song playing creepily in the background.
Oh,
It's like, well, thank you for ruining that nursery rhyme.
Yeah.
Oh man, well, we should probably end it right there. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. This has been a really interesting discussion. Love the stuff that we talked about today. And we would love to hear your own thoughts about anything that we discussed. Tell us about your own relationship with dystopian literature or shows or movies. Do you get what Emily's saying? Does that sometimes happen to you? We'd love to hear from you. Tell us about your own favorite sci-fi shows that you actually really enjoy. Talk to us about the Hunger Games. Are you engaged with that series? What do you think about it? And also be sure to tell us the whole reason why you say geese but not meese. We also want to hear that. So be sure to let us know.
I don't think a group of moose are meese. I was joking.
So be sure to let us know on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. We would love to hear from you on YouTube as well. Write us a letter at team@thepluggedinshow.com, or you can even leave us a voicemail at thepluggedinshow.com homepage. We would love to hear from you, and be sure to join us again next time on The Plugged In Show.